In early November 2025, the Federal Aviation Administration announced something the country hasn't seen in years: a 10% reduction in flight capacity across 40 major U.S. airports. According to an Associated Press report published on November 6th, the FAA said the cuts were necessary because thousands of controllers remain unpaid amid the government shutdown. The reductions were set to begin Friday, November 7th, immediately.
Sir, that the FAA is going to have to cut about 10% of flights at the top 40 airports because of the government shutdown. Are you at all concerned that it might not be safe to fly right now? And what do you tell people who are gearing up for
That's why they're cutting. Yeah, it's a fair question. As Sean Duffy announced, they're cutting in certain areas 10%, and they want to make sure it's 100% safe. That's why they're doing it.
And the list reads like a map of America's air travel backbone. In California, Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, one of the world's busiest passenger hubs. In Georgia, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, ATL, handling nearly 94 million travelers a year. In Illinois, Chicago O'Hare International, ORD, a core hub for United Airlines and American. In Maryland, Baltimore-Washington International Thurgood Marshall, BWI. In Virginia, Washington Dulles International, IAD. And in Washington, D.C., Ronald Reagan Washington National, DCA.
Here is the preliminary list. Now, this can still change, but for now, you can see these are considered some of the biggest and busiest airports in the country. We're talking LAX in California, Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta, O'Hare in Chicago.
These are not small facilities. Together, they move hundreds of millions of passengers annually. Cutting flights here doesn't just inconvenience travelers. It slows the flow of regional economies built around them. A Reuters briefing explained that members of Congress and federal employees would be among those directly affected since they rely heavily on the Washington area airports now under restriction. So, as lawmakers debate the shutdown on Capitol Hill, many of them are stranded in the very delays it created. The FAA oversees roughly 44,000 flights a day, and a 10% cut means about 4,400 flights removed. Daily officials describe the move as a capacity realignment. But to passengers standing in hour-long lines at security checkpoints, it felt like a system on the brink. Inside control towers, the strain was visible. Controllers were working double shifts without pay. Some called out because they couldn't afford childcare, while others picked up second jobs just to stay afloat. Those still on duty were managing wider airspace with fewer hands, a risky equation for an industry built on precision. Officials insisted the 10% cut was about safety, not politics. They wanted to guarantee that fewer flights could still operate safely within the available staffing levels. But they admitted, if the shutdown persisted, the list of airports would expand further. And it wasn't just passenger travel feeling the turbulence. Cargo carriers were also hit. Packages scheduled for next-day delivery sat in grounded planes, forcing logistics firms to reroute through less affected airports. By Friday evening, more than 1,000 flights had been canceled nationwide. Major airlines issued preemptive travel waivers, allowing passengers to rebook without penalty. At terminals from LAX to Atlanta, travelers stared at departure boards going dark. According to the FAA's 2024 Economic Impact Report, U.S. civil aviation supports $1.8 trillion in total activity, nearly 9.4 million jobs, and roughly 4% of GDP. So when 40 of those airports slow down, it's not just a travel story. It's a macroeconomic event. Every grounded plane represents more than lost time. It's lost commerce, lost income, and another sign of a nation's economic engine forced into idle. Welcome to EstateScope, the channel where we expose the hidden forces shaping today's real estate markets. From climate risk to insurance pullouts to overlooked government policies, we break down what's really behind the headlines and what it means for your investments, your home, and your future. If you're into real estate with a twist of investigative reporting, hit like, tap subscribe, and ring the bell icon so you never miss a story that could impact where you live, what you buy, or how you build. Now, Let's get into what might be one of the most overlooked real estate catastrophes of the decade. When airports slow down, economies follow. That's because air travel isn't just about moving people. It's about moving money. According to a 2024 report by Airlines for America, commercial aviation supports about 5% of the entire U.S. economy, driving roughly $1.45 trillion in annual output and more than 10 million jobs across transportation, tourism, and trade. And the FAA's own analysis backs that up. Civil aviation contributes nearly $1.8 trillion in economic activity nationwide. So when the FAA cut flight capacity by 10% at 40 major hubs, from Los Angeles to DC, it wasn't just passengers stranded in terminals. It was the start of an economic slowdown spreading through dozens of connected industries. The chain reaction. Airports are like living ecosystems. Each plane that lands sets off a cascade. A food truck restocks a restaurant. A rideshare driver gets a fare. A warehouse loads outgoing cargo. Now imagine 10% of that vanishing overnight. At Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson, the world's busiest airport, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that taxi lines were half their normal length by the end of the first shutdown weekend, and nearby hotels saw cancellations spike by 15%. In Chicago, Crane's Business noted that freight forwarders at O'Hare began warning clients of unprecedented shipment backlogs within 48 hours of the FAA's announcement. And on the East Coast, Baltimore-Washington International said fuel deliveries for grounded planes fell by nearly 20%, a small statistic that signals millions in lost operating revenue. A study by Airports Council International, North America, ACI-NA, estimates that commercial airports collectively support 12.8 million jobs and nearly $1.8 trillion in annual output. Each day of reduced capacity chips away at that foundation, not just at ticket counters, but in supply chains from manufacturing to hospitality. Communities built around airports. Think about how many American towns rely on airport proximity. Places like College Park, Georgia, Elk Grove Village, Illinois, or Sterling, Virginia. Communities built on the promise of mobility. When the runways go quiet, so do local diners, dry cleaners, and construction projects. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, nearly 1.2 million Americans work in occupations directly tied to air travel. Pilots, attendants, ground crews, maintenance technicians. Another 7 million depend indirectly on that system through tourism and logistics. Each of those jobs supports mortgages, rents, and tax revenue for local governments. So when we talk about flight reductions, what we're really describing is a silent payroll crisis. One that starts at the terminal and echoes into neighborhoods miles away. By mid-November, data from FlightAware showed that total U.S. flight volume was still down about 8% compared to pre-shutdown levels. Analysts at Oxford Economics warned that if the cuts lasted more than 3 weeks, quarterly GDP growth could slip by up to 0.2 percentage points. What began as a bureaucratic standoff in Washington had become something tangible. Shorter shifts, longer commutes, slower deliveries, and quieter streets around once bustling airports. And yet, this is only the second layer of the story. Because behind the payrolls and logistics lies something even more structural: the effect on property, development, and infrastructure. That's where we turn next. When the skies go quiet, the ground starts to feel it. Every runway in America anchors a local economy. And when those runways slow, the ripple doesn't stop at the terminal. It spreads outward to homes, projects, and families who depend on the rhythm of steady flights. Airport cities in pause. In the second week of November 2025, real estate analysts began noticing something subtle but telling. home sales near the 40 affected airports started to dip. Redfin's early November data showed a 5% drop in pending home sales within 10 miles of major airport zones, especially around Reagan National, DCA, in DC, Hartsfield-Jackson, ATL, in Georgia, and Los Angeles International, LAX, in California. That decline wasn't about falling prices, it was about uncertainty. A 2025 National Association of Realtors housing report notes that proximity to employment and travel hubs like airports typically boosts local property values by 4 to 7%. But when travel slows and businesses pause relocation plans, that premium starts to fade. Agents in Northern Virginia told Axios DC they were already seeing fewer corporate closings, longer days on market, and relocation deals on hold. The human bottleneck inside the towers and terminals, the problem isn't just mechanical, it's human. Reports from the Transportation Department's November 2025 update confirmed what many frontline workers were already saying. Controllers were calling out because they couldn't afford childcare. Some had taken side jobs to stay afloat, while others worked back-to-back 12-hour shifts just to keep planes in the air. The Transportation Secretary described it bluntly as enormous pressure on the system. That pressure doesn't end at the control room. It ripples into every project waiting for oversight. Federal safety engineers, inspectors, and planners tied to airport construction were furloughed. No inspections meant no approvals. And without approvals, billion-dollar projects stalled. Stalled infrastructure projects. Shutdowns don't just freeze paychecks. They freeze progress. According to a 2025 FAA Capital Improvement Report, more than $7.1 billion in airport modernization funding is tied to federal appropriations. When those funds lock up, so do the cranes and concrete. At Dallas-Fort Worth, DFW, a $2.3 billion Terminal F expansion was delayed pending federal reimbursement. In Denver, Concourse B renovations slowed as inspectors were furloughed. And in Atlanta, runway resurfacing bids were on hold until cash flow resumes, according to airport officials. Every pause costs money. A Government Accountability Office analysis warns that each month of halted appropriations can raise final construction costs by up to 9% due to inflation and remobilization. That's the silent cost of political stalemate, measured not in votes, but in dollars lost to delay. Industrial and logistics pressure airports don't only move people, they move goods. Around every major hub sits a belt of warehouses, trucking depots, and logistics parks. When flights decline, inventory backs up, and real estate demand follows suit. A 2025 Cushman and Wakefield logistics report found that warehouse occupancy near air cargo corridors dropped 6% quarter over quarter, with the sharpest declines around Chicago O'Hare, ORD, and Dallas-Fort Worth, DFW. Fewer shipments mean lower rent rolls, and owners are already offering concessions to retain tenants. Morningstar's Q4 2025 REIT update reclassified aviation-linked industrial holdings as under review, citing short-term revenue compression likely through early 2026. Communities under strain drive 5 miles from any major airport, and the slowdown becomes personal. In Sterling, Virginia, restaurants serving Dulles YAD ground crews have shortened hours. In College Park, Georgia, a dry cleaner who's pressed pilot uniforms for 2 decades told local news, "If the flights stop, my machines stop." That's it. In Burbank, California, a daycare center near the runway lost several families when airline workers cut childcare to cover unpaid bills. The same hardship air traffic controllers reported in national coverage earlier this month. It's a feedback loop. Fewer shifts mean less childcare. Less childcare means fewer workers available, and fewer workers mean more delays. The bigger pattern. Economists at Brookings Metro describe this as a localized shock event. Each grounded plane subtracts a taxi ride, a hotel stay, a cargo load. Small hits that multiply fast. The FAA's 2025 preliminary economic update estimates aviation still supports about 9.5 million jobs and 4.1% of U.S. GDP. If just 1% of that workforce loses hours or income, that's nearly 100,000 households suddenly uncertain. Uncertainty delays purchases, freezes leases, and weakens consumer spending, all of which ripple back into housing. When people think shutdown, they picture long TSA lines or canceled vacations. But the real consequences are quieter. A parent staying home because they can't pay for childcare. A contractor staring at idle cranes. A warehouse manager counting empty loading docks. America's housing market doesn't collapse all at once. It slows, breath by breath, as confidence drains from the system. And confidence, once lost, is the hardest thing to rebuild. When the first flights disappeared from departure boards, it didn't look like an economic event. Just a few canceled routes, a few longer waits. But 2 weeks later, the ripple had reached the neighborhoods beyond the runways. Because when airports slow, houses start to whisper. The open houses grow quieter. The for sale signs stay up a little longer. And the rhythm of America's housing market, normally steady, predictable, begins to hesitate. The long quiet. From homes to recovery. The silence began in the sky. Then it spread. At first, it was just fewer flights on the departure board. A gap between gate numbers. A little more space between takeoffs. But 2 weeks later, the quiet had reached living rooms, storefronts, and city halls. Because the truth is simple. When the skies slow down, so does everything underneath them. Where the engines fell silent. In Arlington, the sound of Reagan National Airport is part of the city's rhythm, a hum that says life is moving. Now, that hum is gone. Real estate agent Sarah Lee scrolls through her listings, sighs, and says, "The silence feels wrong. Buyers aren't calling. They're waiting." Her words mirror the numbers. Bright MLS data shows an 8% drop in showings. George Mason University estimates $120 million a week lost in spending. The shutdown that began as politics in Washington is now personal, playing out in every paused mortgage and delayed closing. A few hundred miles south in Atlanta, the world's busiest airport has become a little less busy. Restaurants around Hartsfield-Jackson close earlier now. A diner owner gestures at empty booths. You can tell by the luggage. When it stops rolling in, so does the money home sales in Clayton County have fallen 6%. Developers nearby have put projects on hold until things feel safe again. And for airport workers with shortened shifts, safe feels like a distant word. The pause. That spreads. Every grounded plane sets off a chain reaction. Fewer passengers mean fewer hotel stays. Fewer hotel stays mean less tax revenue. Less revenue means projects. The visible kind, cranes and concrete, stop moving. Across the country, the FAA's 2025 capital improvement list shows over $7 billion in upgrades tied to federal approvals. But when inspectors were furloughed, every blueprint froze in place. In Dallas, the $2.3 billion Terminal F expansion sits half-built, waiting for signatures. In Los Angeles, steel frames for the LAX People Mover rust a little in the marine air. Workers check their phones each morning for an email that still hasn't come. The GAO says every month of halted funding adds up to 9% to final costs. Time is money. And right now, both are sitting on the tarmac. When Main Street slows, Wall Street listens. By mid-November, analysts were already adjusting their forecasts. Moody's Analytics trimmed Q4 GDP growth by 0.2 points, warning of aviation-related consumption drag. The Dow Jones Transportation Index hit its lowest mark since 2024. Airline stocks slipped, and REITs tied to hotels and logistics fell 4%. But the story isn't just in red numbers on a chart. It's in how quickly those numbers echo back. Lower market confidence means tighter credit. Tighter credit delays projects. Delayed projects mean fewer jobs. The same jobs people in Arlington, Atlanta, and Los Angeles are already missing. Economists at Brookings Metro call this a feedback recession. Not a crash, but a quiet loop where hesitation becomes policy. The city's counting the cost. In Dallas, the city's CFO puts it simply: every flight we lose costs us twice, once in airport revenue, and again in hotel tax revenue. The National League of Cities says airports supply roughly 15% of total commercial tax receipts in major metros like Dallas, Chicago, and Atlanta. When flights fall 10%, city budgets feel it immediately. Delayed roadwork, trimmed transit upgrades, postponed school repairs. Public Works directors describe it as a shadow freeze. The fiscal chill mirrors the emotional one, a country waiting for permission to start again. The first signs of motion. And then, slowly, motion returns. It starts not with a roar, but with a hum, the sound of engines warming before dawn. At first, it's just one runway reopening at O'Hare, one tower crew reporting back after weeks of reduced shifts. But in aviation, small movements mean everything. On November 25th, the FAA releases its phased recovery plan. 5% capacity restored each week once federal funding resumes. It's cautious, controlled, but it's progress. At Chicago O'Hare, cargo flights tick upward. A few pallets of electronics finally leaving the warehouse where they'd been stranded for weeks. In Phoenix, hotels near Sky Harbor report their first weekend of full bookings since early November. And in Atlanta, after 18 silent days, a foreman sends his crew a simple text: "We're back next Monday." Across the country, the long quiet begins to lift. Controllers who had been working double shifts start to rotate back into normal schedules. Those who'd taken side jobs, driving ride shares, working retail to pay bills, are finally returning to their towers. As one of them told a local reporter, "I'm not here for the paycheck right now. I'm here because the system needs balance again." The Transportation Secretary, in a late November press briefing, confirmed what everyone inside aviation already knew. The pressure on the system is easing, but it's going to take time to rebuild what was stretched thin in Los Angeles. Runway maintenance resumes under the morning haze. A mechanic wipes grease from his hands, looks at the jet waiting for clearance, and smiles. Been waiting to hear that sound again. Momentum rekindled confidence, economists say, doesn't just return, it relearns how to move. Analysts at Oxford Economics project that by Q2 2026, aviation and its connected sectors, logistics, hospitality, and construction could recover to pre-shutdown levels if stability holds. But the numbers only tell part of the story. In DC, mortgage lenders report a flicker of life. Pre-approvals up for the first time since October. In Dallas, hotel tax receipts edge upward as business travel resumes. In Atlanta, airport traffic climbs back to 90% capacity, and local shops reopen with handwritten welcome back signs taped to their doors. And in homes across the country, lights stay on a little later, not because people can't sleep, but because they can plan again. The human layer. Reporters covering the recovery described the mood as measured optimism. Controllers still talk about the exhaustion, the childcare crises, the fear of missing a paycheck, the same issues that triggered the 10% capacity cuts in the first place. But there's a shared relief in their voices now. As one broadcast put it, "The skies are busier again, but this time every flight feels personal. Cargo delays are shrinking, mail routes are steadying, and airports that once echoed with frustration now hum with cautious energy. The system isn't perfect, but it's moving." Reflection. What the sky taught us for weeks. America learned how fragile momentum can be. That the sound of a jet overhead isn't just travel. It's a measure of motion, of trust, of normal life. It's the heartbeat of a connected country. When those planes stopped, we saw how many lives depend on their rhythm. The controller who missed his child's bedtime working overtime. The hotel clerk folding linens with fewer tips to take home. The investor watching markets flutter like turbulence. The mother at home in Arlington who heard only silence where engines used to be. And when the engines started again, one tower, one runway, one shift at a time. It wasn't just about airports. It was about the idea of movement returning. Because recovery isn't automatic. It's a collective act of faith. The belief that systems can start again, that people will keep showing up, and that progress, even slow, still counts. Confidence, it turns out, is the same invisible force that lifts both wings and economies. So, as planes climb once more into the morning sky, they carry more than passengers. They carry proof that after the stillness, America can move again. Stay alert. Stay informed.
Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, please like, comment, and share to help others stay informed. And don't forget to visit EstateScope on YouTube for the full video and more real estate insights.